Hello everyone. In the today's video, we are going to look at the basics of the swaps. What are the different types of swaps? Okay. So firstly, swaps are derivative contracts. And what do we mean by derivative contracts? So any contract or any agreement that derives a value based on some underlying is nothing but a derivative. For example, when we look at the options, now we say options are derivative. Why? Because they derive their value based on the underlying stock or the underlying index. Okay. In case of swaps, depending on which type it is going to derive its value based on the underlying. Now, in any swap, there would be two counterparties. Just say counterparty 1 and counterparty 2. These two counterparties are going to exchange some cash flow or payments over the period, and we are going to look at how to derive all those payments for different swaps in the subsequent videos. But for now, let's focus on the concept. Okay, so till now we have established swaps are a derivative contract since they derive value based on some underlying, and each swap has two counterparties which over the period of the swap contract are going to exchange some cash flows or the payments. Okay, now talk about types of swaps. Swaps can be differentiated based on how they are settled. Okay. Okay. Now majority of swaps are going to be OTCs, meaning over the counter. And the other type is not the exchange traded, but what we called as CCs, centrally cleared. Okay. Now in case of over the counters, the terms of the swap contract are negotiated between the two counterparties, and the exchange of the cash flows, everything is done by the counterparties themselves. Okay, so there is no central governing body or a settlement agency that is going to help them in this process. Okay, so in this case, the major risk is counterparty risk, right? If the counterparty defaults or denies the payment, then there would be a loss for the other counterparty, right? So that is the major risk in this case. Whereas in case of centrally cleared swaps, we have a central agency which is going to guarantee the settlement of these swaps. So this central agency would take the collateral or cash. In simple terms, we can call it as a cash or some sort of guarantee from these counterparties which are involved. Okay, so in case of a default, the central agency already has the money which they can pay to the other counterparty. Okay, so this centrally cleared swaps would reduce the counterparty risk, still giving the flexibility to decide on the contract terms. Okay, going further, now we are going to look at types of swap basis the underlying. Just keep in mind this swap concept is very evolving in a sense. Every few days or year you will find a new type of swap, and they can be customized, so which results in many times. What we are going to discuss over here are the broad categories in which we can divide these swaps. Okay, so the first category we have is equity swap. Now, as the name suggests, this swap, the underlying for this swap is going to be an equity or a stock. Okay, now very similar swap is an index swap. So in this case, you would have an index as underlying. And in the first case, we had a stock as an underlying. For example, let's just say Apple stock. Okay. Now all the payments are based on how the Apple stock performs. Whereas in the second case, in the case of index swap, we would have, let's just say, NASDAQ. And basis the performance of that index, we are going to get the payments. Okay. The second type is interest rate swap. Now in this case, the underlying is going to be an interest rate. Can be a LIBOR, can be a Euribor, or any other interest rate. Okay. The next type is we have credit default swap. Now the underlying for this is bond. Okay, and essentially this swap would be used as a protection by a bond holder against the default of the entity. Now let's just say I have purchased bonds of Apple. Now the credit default swap is basically going to give me the protection in case Apple defaults on those bond payments. Okay. The next would be commodity swap. As the name suggests, underlying is going to be any commodity, can be a metal, any of the metals, coffee, anything, right? The next is currency swap. Can be any currency, right? Euro, GBP. And in this case, you would have a currency pair, not just one currency. Okay. So for currency swap, you need to have two currencies involved. Can be any currency pair, right? The famous would be USD and Euro. Okay. Now in the equity or the index swap, we have further two types. One would be your total return swap, and this terminology is often used as an alternative for an equity swap. Okay, so don't just get confused. So whenever someone says a total return swap, essentially they're talking either about the index swap or an equity swap. Okay, and the second would be contract for difference. CFD. So what is the difference between the two? Okay, let's just say I have taken an equity swap on any stock, and after some days the stock pays the dividend. Okay, so if the swap I had taken was total return swap, I would get the dividend payment. As the name suggests, it's the total return swap, meaning I would get paid if stock goes in my direction or if there is any cash flow from the underlying stock. In case of contract for difference, we get payments only due to price difference. Okay, so any other cash flow from the underlying is not passed on to us, and the only return that you would get would be because of the change in price. So these are broadly the classification of these swaps, and you can hear many more names, as you know, they keep on customizing one leg. But essentially, when someone says swap, what we have to think of is there are two counterparties, they're exchanging some sort of cash flows, and the name would indicate what type of the underlying is, right? I mean, it gives clear indication as to what we are talking about. In the subsequent videos, we are going to look at each of these swaps and understand how payments are derived. Now, if you are watching this video for any academic purpose, probably the understanding that you have got in this video is more than enough. If you are a professional working into hedge accounting or hedge fund reporting, I'd advise you to go in depth in the subsequent videos, which will help you perform much better in your respective fields. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.